The emergency room was loud, chaotic, and tense, just like every night in a busy city hospital. Patients filled every chair, nurses rushed between rooms, and doctors shouted medical terms across the hallway. Then suddenly, everything stopped. A young black woman sitting quietly in the waiting area was suddenly grabbed by a nurse and ordered to leave the emergency room. People stared as the nurse loudly accused her of wasting everyone's time and demanded she get out immediately. The woman tried to explain something, but the nurse wasn't listening. Within seconds, security was being called, patients were watching, and someone nearby quietly started recording the scene on their phone. But what no one in that room knew was that the woman they were throwing out of the ER was the wife of the city's police chief. And within minutes, that hospital would face consequences no one saw coming. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories that reveal truth and justice, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who believes in fairness, and subscribe to the channel Black Legacy for more unforgettable stories. The city of Brookdale was known for many things. Its growing skyline, its busy streets, and its reputation for being a place where people from many backgrounds lived side by side. But like many cities beneath the polished buildings and modern hospitals, old biases and assumptions still lingered quietly in everyday life. Brookdale General Hospital stood in the center of downtown. It was the largest hospital in the city and one of the busiest emergency rooms in the region. On most nights, the waiting area overflowed with patients seeking help for injuries, illnesses, and emergencies of all kinds. That night had started like any other. Rain had been falling across the city since late afternoon, making traffic slow and accidents more common. By the time the evening shift arrived, the ER waiting room was packed. Among the people sitting quietly in one corner was a woman named Danielle Carter. Danielle looked calm, but she was clearly uncomfortable. A faint line of blood ran down the side of her forehead, and she held a small cloth against it. Her clothes were slightly wet from rain, and her breathing was steady but careful. She had arrived only 10 minutes earlier after slipping on the wet pavement outside a nearby parking garage. The fall had been sudden, and though she managed to catch herself, her head struck the corner of a metal railing. The impact left a small cut above her eyebrow. It wasn't life-threatening, but it definitely needed medical attention. Danielle had walked into the ER quietly, checked in with the front desk, and taken a seat among the other patients. She didn't complain. She didn't demand attention. She simply waited her turn like everyone else. Across the room sat a teenage girl wearing a purple hoodie. She watched the room carefully while scrolling on her phone. Nearby, several other patients shifted impatiently in their seats. In the middle of the hallway stood Nurse Rebecca Lawson, a senior nurse who had worked in the emergency department for nearly 8 years. Rebecca was known among staff for being efficient and strict. She prided herself on keeping the ER organized, even during the most stressful nights. But tonight, her patience was thin. Several patients had already complained about wait times. Doctors were behind schedule, and ambulances had begun arriving faster than the staff could process them. Rebecca stepped into the waiting room and scanned the chairs quickly. Her eyes landed on Danielle. At first, it was just a quick glance. But then Rebecca frowned. She noticed Danielle's relaxed posture, the way she held her phone, and the small cut on her forehead that didn't appear severe from a distance. To Rebecca, it looked like someone who didn't belong in the emergency room. And in that moment, a quiet assumption formed in her mind. Without asking questions or checking the intake notes carefully, Rebecca walked directly toward Danielle. People in the waiting room began watching the interaction quietly. The teenage girl in the purple hoodie looked up from her phone. Rebecca's voice suddenly cut through the room, sharp and loud. Her tone wasn't calm. It wasn't professional. It carried frustration, authority, and a hint of something else. Within seconds, Danielle found herself standing, confused, as Rebecca insisted she leave the emergency room immediately. Several people in the waiting area looked shocked. Danielle attempted to explain that she had been injured and had already checked in. But Rebecca wasn't listening. To her, Danielle looked like someone wasting time in an already overcrowded ER, and Rebecca was determined to clear space. Across the room, the teenage girl slowly raised her phone and started recording. The tension in the room thickened. Most people stayed silent, unsure whether to speak up. Danielle looked around the waiting room, realizing she was suddenly being treated like she didn't belong there. The rain outside continued tapping against the windows. Inside the ER, a moment of quiet humiliation unfolded in front of dozens of strangers. But this moment was only the beginning, because within minutes, one phone call would change everything, and the entire hospital would soon realize that the woman they had just forced out was not who they thought she was. The tension in the emergency room grew thicker with every passing second. Danielle Carter stood near the chair she had just been sitting in, her hand still pressed lightly against a small cut on her forehead. Blood had slowed, but the sting of the injury remained. More painful than the cut, however, was a sudden humiliation spreading through the room. Dozens of strangers were now watching. Some patients shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others avoided eye contact, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. The teenage girl in the purple hoodie continued holding her phone steady, quietly recording everything that was unfolding. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of the emergency department as Nurse Rebecca Lawson crossed her arms impatiently. To Rebecca, the situation was simple. The emergency room was overcrowded. There were real emergencies arriving by ambulance. And in her mind, Danielle looked like someone who could easily go to urgent care instead. Without reviewing Danielle's medical intake or asking further questions, Rebecca had already decided. She motioned toward the exit doors with firm authority. Danielle hesitated. The room felt colder now, as if the air itself had changed. People whispered quietly. A man sitting nearby shook his head in disbelief but said nothing. Danielle slowly gathered her purse from the chair. Her movements were calm, controlled, and careful. Anyone watching closely could see she was trying to keep her composure. But something about the situation felt deeply wrong. The injury on her head was still fresh, and she had followed every step the hospital required. She had checked in properly. She had waited quietly. She had done everything right. Yet somehow, she was the one being treated like she didn't belong. As Danielle moved toward the exit doors, the teenage girl lowered her phone slightly and glanced at the screen. The recording had already captured everything. The harsh tone, the accusations, the confusion on Danielle's face, the silent discomfort of the other patients watching. The girl didn't fully understand the gravity of what she had just recorded, but she knew one thing for sure. Something about this situation felt unfair. Outside the hospital doors, the rain was still falling. Danielle stepped onto the wet pavement, the cool night air brushing against her face. The hospital lights glowed behind her as she paused near the entrance. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she slowly reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Across town, inside a quiet office filled with city reports and late-night paperwork, Chief Marcus Carter was finishing the final review of a community safety report. Marcus had served as the city's police chief for nearly 6 years. Known for his calm leadership and strong commitment to fairness, he had spent most of his career trying to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. But tonight, his focus was suddenly interrupted. His phone vibrated on the desk. The name on the screen immediately caught his attention. Danielle, Marcus answered quickly. As he listened, the quiet calm of his office slowly disappeared. The details unfolded piece by piece. The fall, the injury, the ER visit, and then the part that made his jaw tighten. His wife had been forced out of the emergency room without treatment. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. The city outside his office window stretched endlessly into the dark night, lights glowing across buildings and streets. Marcus had seen many difficult situations during his career, but hearing that his wife had been humiliated and dismissed while injured inside a hospital struck a deeply personal nerve. He closed the folder on his desk. Within moments, he was already reaching for his coat. Back at Brookdale General Hospital, the emergency room staff continued their routine without realizing what had just been set into motion. Nurse Rebecca Lawson returned to the nurse's station, frustrated but satisfied that she had cleared space in the waiting area. Patients continued arriving. Doctors moved quickly between treatment rooms. The hospital operated like a machine, unaware that a quiet storm was building outside. Meanwhile, The teenage girl in the purple hoodie uploaded the video she had recorded. At first, it was simply shared with a few friends. But within minutes, something unexpected happened. People began reacting. The video spread quickly across social media. Viewers were shocked by what they saw. A woman with a visible head injury being dismissed from an emergency room. A nurse speaking harshly in front of an entire waiting room. And a quiet, uncomfortable silence from the people watching. Comments flooded in rapidly. Questions began appearing. Anger began rising. And then someone noticed something in the video. A small detail that would change everything. One viewer recognized Danielle Carter, not just as a patient, but as someone they had seen before at city events, standing beside the police chief. The realization spread quickly through the comment sections. Within minutes, the video had gained thousands of views. Inside the hospital, however, no one yet realized what was happening online. But that silence would not last long, because at that very moment, a black SUV had just pulled into the hospital parking lot, and the man stepping out of the driver's seat was not just a concerned husband. He was the chief of police, and he was about to walk into the very emergency room that had just thrown his wife out. The glass doors of Brookdale General Hospital slid open as Chief Marcus Carter stepped inside. Rainwater dripped from his coat as he moved through the quiet lobby. Several visitors glanced in his direction, immediately recognizing him. Marcus didn't slow down. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet intensity that made the air around him feel heavier. When he reached the emergency room entrance, the automatic doors opened again. Inside, the same waiting room scene continued. Patients sitting, nurses walking quickly between desks, television screens glowing softly above the chairs. For a moment, everything appeared normal, but Marcus noticed something else immediately. The same nurse who had removed his wife earlier, Rebecca Lawson, stood near the front desk speaking with another staff member. Marcus approached slowly. The sound of his footsteps drew attention from several people in the room. One patient whispered quietly. Another nudged the person beside them. Recognition spread quickly. Rebecca turned around. At first, she didn't understand why the room had suddenly gone quiet. Then she saw him. Her expression shifted instantly. The realization struck like lightning. Standing in front of her was a man whose name every law enforcement officer in the city knew, Chief Marcus Carter. The room became completely silent. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. Instead, he calmly asked one question. Where was the patient who had just been removed from the emergency room? Rebecca struggled to respond. The confidence she had displayed earlier was suddenly gone. Hospital administrators were quickly alerted. Within minutes, the hospital director arrived. Behind him, several department managers rushed toward the scene. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, Danielle remained seated inside Marcus's SUV. She had insisted on waiting there rather than returning inside. Her injury still needed attention, but the emotional weight of the earlier incident lingered heavily. Inside the hospital, Marcus listened carefully as staff attempted to explain what had happened. But something else interrupted the conversation. Phones across the hospital began buzzing. Staff members checked their screens. The video, it had gone viral. Thousands of people were now watching the moment Danielle had been removed from the ER. Local news outlets had already started contacting the hospital for comments. The hospital director's face turned pale as he watched the clip. The footage left little room for explanation. The incident was clear, the treatment was undeniable, and the public reaction was growing stronger by the minute. Marcus remained calm, but his message to the hospital leadership was firm. This situation wasn't just about his wife. It was about how patients were treated, how assumptions were made, and how quickly someone could be dismissed without being heard. Within the hour, a decision was made. The emergency department was temporarily suspended for internal investigation. Administrative staff began reviewing procedures. Nurse Rebecca Lawson was immediately placed on leave pending investigation, and the hospital released a public statement acknowledging the incident. Outside, the flashing lights of news vans began arriving. The story had already spread across the city, but the most important part of the night was still unfolding quietly. Inside Marcus's SUV, Danielle sat quietly as Marcus returned to the car. This time, he helped her back inside the hospital, but not through the crowded emergency waiting room. She was taken directly into treatment, and for the first time that night, she finally received the care she had come for. By the next morning, the story had reached nearly every corner of Brookdale. News channels replayed the video. Social media continued sharing the clip. People debated the situation everywhere, from workplaces to coffee shops. But beyond the headlines, something deeper had been exposed. The investigation at Brookdale General Hospital revealed serious problems in patient intake procedures and staff training. Assumptions had replaced proper medical evaluation. Bias had influenced judgment, and a system designed to help people had failed someone who needed it. The hospital leadership announced sweeping changes. New policies were introduced to ensure every patient would be evaluated properly regardless of appearance or assumptions. Staff training programs were expanded to address bias and patient rights. And the hospital issued a formal apology to Danielle Carter. Danielle herself never sought attention from the situation. She didn't appear on talk shows. She didn't give interviews. Instead, she focused on healing and moving forward. But the impact of that night remained powerful, because sometimes it takes a single moment, captured by a phone camera, to reveal truths that many people overlook every day. A moment that forces institutions to reflect. A moment that sparks conversations across communities. And a moment that reminds everyone of one simple truth. Respect and fairness should never depend on who someone is. They should be given to everyone, no matter what. If this story moved you and you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to like the video, share it with others, leave your thought in the comments, and subscribe to the channel Black Legacy for more powerful stories that reveal truth, justice, and real change.